Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the wildest corporate expansions in human history. We're going to explore how an early joint stock startup basically used legal loopholes and strict monopolies to pull off a massive political takeover of an entire subcontinent. It's a crazy story of commerce, conflict, and honestly, massive corporate overreach that literally reshaped the globe. Let's get right into it. So, when we think of the English East India Company, we usually picture this highly calculated, unstoppable imperial juggernaut right out of the gate. But looking at the notes for today, it was actually kind of a mess at first. The text explicitly says their advent around the year 1600 was more like an accident rather than an organized effort. No grand master plan here. It was really just a loose collection of survey reports, data sent back by early overland and sea explorers, guys like Thomas Stevens and John Mildenhall. That's scattered data. That's what finally sparked the idea to even form a company back in England. Now, despite that chaotic start, they moved incredibly fast to lock down the ultimate competitive advantage. And it definitely helps when your biggest backer is Queen Elizabeth herself. On December 31st, 1600, the Queen, who actually happened to be their largest shareholder, granted them a royal charter. But this wasn't just some standard business license. It established a strict trading monopoly in the East Indies. Basically, the East India Company became the one and only English company legally allowed to trade with India and the East. Talk about a cornered market. To actually secure a foothold on the subcontinent, the company started setting up what they called factories in places like Surat and Masulipatanam. Now, quick pause here because the terminology is kind of confusing. When you and I hear the word factory today, we immediately think of like a manufacturing plant with assembly lines and smokestacks, right? But in this historical context, and our source makes this super clear, a factory was simply a warehouse. It was just a fortified administrative depot used to manage trade and house officials. Absolutely no manufacturing was happening there. And right here is where we start seeing them blend military muscle with boardroom strategy. In 1612, they essentially proved they weren't to be messed with by defeating the Portuguese at the Battle of Swally. That show of force, that was exactly the leverage their diplomat, Sir Thomas Roe, needed. Armed with that victory between 1615 and 1619, Roe successfully lobbied the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to get formal permission to build those fortified factories across the entire Mughal territory. They were officially expanding. Of course, they weren't the only European startup playing this high-stakes game. The Dutch were a massive rival. So, to eliminate that direct market competition, the English and the Dutch sat down and struck a massive non-compete agreement in 1667. They literally carved up the map. The English agreed to leave Indonesia completely to the Dutch, and in exchange, the Dutch gave the English total free rein to expand in India, no interference. This deal let the English company focus 100% of its energy on dominating the Indian market. But, as we know, unchecked ambition often leads to some pretty severe miscalculations. In 1687, this aggressive corporate expansion hit a massive brick wall. English officers ended up creating severe disruptions for Hajj pilgrims. Well, Emperor Aurangzeb, who was arguably at the absolute peak of Mughal power at the time, did not take this lightly. He swiftly retaliated, confiscating all English settlements and arresting an English officer named John Child. It was a massive, humiliating reality check. The company had to write all these groveling apology letters and pay a ransom of 1.5 lakhs. Just to put that into perspective, that was an absolute fortune back then. Only after paying up would Aurangzeb release Child and let them trade again. So strong central leadership clearly kept the company in check. But the real game changer, the real opening for a corporate takeover, emerged right after Aurangzeb died. His death kicked off a chaotic era of rapid management turnover, basically. The previously unified Mughal Empire got completely destabilized by intense factional politics between the Irani, Turani, and Hindustani groups. We literally see this rapid, dizzying succession of emperors taking the throne. Bahadur Shah I, then Jahandar Shah, then Farrukhsiyar, who was actually installed by the influential Syed brothers, and later Muhammad Shah. It was total political whiplash. And this leadership vacuum at the very top, it totally fractured the empire. It allowed regional, autonomous states to suddenly rise up and assert themselves. Places like Bengal, Nizam, Awadh, Mysore, and the Maratha territories. Now, the East India Company had spent decades deeply embedding itself into these local economies. So they immediately saw the opening and started converting their vast economic influence into direct political dominance within these newly fractured independent regions. Now, out of all these autonomous states, the company zeroed in on one prime target, the absolute crown jewel, Bengal. And why Bengal? Well, it was a total gold mine. The source notes spell it out perfectly. It was exceptionally prosperous, driven by highly skilled local handicrafts and incredibly fertile land. We're talking about land that pumped out highly lucrative cash crops like jute, indigo, tea, and opium. For an aggressive trading company, taking over Bengal was like hitting the absolute jackpot. On top of that, Bengal wasn't just rich in natural resources. It was the ultimate logistical hub. It had these incredible, vital connections to both Asiatic and intercontinental trade routes. Actually, the strategic placement of Bengal was so crucial that the English company's other settlements, way out in Southeast Asia, were actively guided and managed right from Bengal. It was the absolute nerve center for their entire eastern operation.
So the real turning point for their dominance here happened in 1717. Emperor Farrukh Siyar issued something called a farman. Think of this as the ultimate corporate mega deal. According to this farman, the East India Company would pay the Mughal emperor a flat fixed fee of exactly 10,000 rupees a year. In exchange, they got the right to exercise entirely free trade across Bengal, the Deccan, and Gujarat. The historical notes actually called this specific farman the Magna Carta for the company. It was the ultimate regulatory victory secured for just pennies on the dollar.
Crucially, this 1717 deal gave the company the right to issue a dastak, basically a free trading pass within Bengal. Now, on the surface, that just sounds like standard business practice, right? Just a permit to move company goods without paying local transit taxes. But it leads us to a really important question. How exactly did this one specific tax loophole spark a massive historic war?
Well, things reached a boiling point because of rampant, unchecked corporate corruption. The company completely weaponized this tax loophole. Just imagine a modern megacorporation not only dodging its own taxes, but then secretly selling tax-exempt passes to other businesses, because that's exactly what went down. First, the company was granted the dastak for official corporate goods. Fine. But then, the company's servants started illegally using these passes for their own private, personal side hustles just to dodge taxes. And it gets worse. The company then literally started selling these free trading passes under the table to local Indian merchants. This blatantly illegal corporate behavior just continuously drained vital tax revenue straight out of the local government. The Nawab of Bengal was basically forced to sit by and watch his state's treasury completely empty out, all while the company and its employees were getting fabulously wealthy. It created a totally unsustainable economic environment for the state. I mean, a government simply cannot function if its largest economic player refuses to pay taxes and actively helps everyone else dodge them too. Now, the local rulers really tried to manage this delicately. Nawab Ali Vardi Khan, for instance, desperately tried to avoid a full-scale military conflict. The notes mention this amazing comparison he made. He actually likened these dangerous European corporations to bees. He said, if you leave them alone, they give you honey, but if you disturb them, they'll sting you to death. He was trying to extract the maximum economic benefit while keeping the peace, but with that continuous financial bleeding, a collision was just inevitable.
The company's absolute refusal to rein in its monopolistic greed and stop misusing the dastak set a direct roadmap for military escalation. That delicate peace that Ali Vardi Khan had maintained, it finally snapped under the next Nawab, Siraj-ud-Dowlah. This deep, structural economic conflict directly triggered the historic Battle of Plassey in 1757. And that was it. That was the exact moment the company officially crossed the line from being merchants to full-blown military conquerors.
As we look ahead to those impending battles and the centuries of history that followed, this incredible corporate evolution really leaves us with a profound question. We've seen them go from a totally chaotic startup relying on explorer surveys to securing monopolies, exploiting tax loopholes, and literally bankrupting local governments. It forces us to ask, what are the ultimate consequences when a ruthless, profit-driven entity gains unchecked power over a divided nation? Definitely something to chew on as you reflect on the history we covered today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible narratives hidden within our history.